It's exciting.
Oh,
You
there it
know.
is.
Sorry.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome again to our WeThink weekly video. This week will be a special edition where we will be talking about the takeaways from the WeThink UAV UGV Emerging Threats Wargame. And just a brief recap, WeThink is a European-based all-online strategy group, and the WeThink UAV UGV Emerging Threats Working Group is focused on exploring the emerging threats coming from commercial off-the-shelf UAVs, uh, UGVs, all unmanned or uninhabited systems, and whether it's a violent non-state actor or also later in some cases state actors. And so today we're going to talk about one of the ways that we've explored that question, which is through the war game. And so today I just want to introduce you to Carrie Chavez from Texas Tech, who's been the kind of driving force behind a lot of the analytics and understanding. If I understand, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work.
So, like he said, I'm Dr. Carrie Chavez. I'm currently at Texas Tech University. I'm also doing some data collection at the Peace, War, and Social Conflict Lab at the university, and I'm a non-resident fellow with the Modern War Institute at West Point. And a lot of my work looks at the politics, strategies, and emerging technologies of modern warfare, conflict, and security. So this project is in one of my sweet spots, looking at how violent non-state actors are leveraging drones to advance their agenda. And so that's the connection with my work, my research. I have a data set on the universe of violent non-state actors that are using drones. I have several publications, and then of course I do several of these types of working groups so that we can continue to advance our knowledge over this fast-growing phenomenon.
Well, awesome. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And of course, we have Ingo, the CEO of WeThink, the driving force behind a whole lot of different things. If you could introduce yourself as well and let us know about all the things that you're doing and what your role is in the war game.
So thank you. That was already a very exhaustive introduction. So yeah, my role so basically CEO of WeThink, co-organizing this project on counter UAV, and my role was as the moderator in both blues and red team. Yeah.
All right. So without any further ado, I guess we can get into it. So what was the sort of purpose, the objective of phase one of the war game?
Well, first, I think it's great that you just said phase one to signal that this is a multi-phased project. and in fact, one of the objectives of phase one was to learn from the process and to refine it for future phases, which we have done. And so we're going to be talking about that some. But I think the main objective was to just spark some preliminary insights on attack and defense modalities for UAVs in urban settings. That's the one of the main aspects that we're exploring in the project.
Okay, and so would you say with the greater strategy of the war game as well, when we're talking about the bigger picture as we develop it into the other phases, how would you describe the objective and kind of strategy
of this phase or of the big picture?
Just the big picture, because I think I like you pointed out, I only mentioned phase one, but I think maybe we could also cover the bigger picture as well, in the reverse order. But
okay, yeah. So I think the main goal of the project is to increase the resilience of EU and NATO partner states against the violent non-state actor drone threat, especially sensitive infrastructure and population-centric venues, so sensitive and precious assets, because there is a pretty growing frequency and breadth and effectiveness of these groups using drones. And so we want to stay on the leading edge of that phenomenon as it's growing, and we want to equip blue teams or security providers to be able to develop best responses so that as it grows, we're growing even faster and better.
And so, what can we say about the kind of scenario of the phase one? How would you describe it, and what can we say to the audience about that?
I'll let Ingo take that one.
Say something? Okay, wonderful. So perfect. We had two teams, 8 people each. So one was the red team, the enemy, or the attacker of the critical infrastructure. The other one was the blue team, basically getting into the role of the police and the bigger kind of security network behind it. And we were looking at a European football or soccer stadium, as they're called in the US, I think. So profile of the red team was we were looking at right-wing nationalist movement or a group, basically homegrown. The type we saw maybe in the last few years in Germany. In some high-profile cases, we were thinking we gave basically the outline that they had a certain military background and a certain technical expertise, so they could do some of the more sophisticated, complex courses of actions. Resources, we gave them small arms and amount of explosives. Basically, in our story, they were stolen from a military base, and then we gave them 50,000 euros that we said they collected in their supporter network. Their objective was to cause property damage and/or casualties in the stadium in order to have a publicity effect, an information effect. And we gave them the restriction or the constraint that they should choose UAVs as the main effort, so they could combine it with other courses of action or other effects, but for they should so told them use UAVs. Yeah. Blue team basically was in our story contracted by the police and the stadium to develop a security concept. They were given a budget of 3 million euros, so they could also look at some more complex defensive system. And then, of course, they could request additional resources normally available in stadium security, so police forces, riot police, specialized police, emergency services, stuff like this, and also private security that is normally checking in the stadium and at the entrance. And we told them, of course, that the main effort will be, so they receive chatter that the main effort in an upcoming attack, a probable attack, will involve UAVs. So this is where they started from. Then we held basically 2 meetings for each groups. We gave them the story outline beforehand. We also told them think about your characters so that they could feel a little bit more involved in the role. So think about your characters. They were supposed to send kind of a character description beforehand and also already think a little bit on themselves about some possible courses of action. Then we had these 2 meetings for each group. So I was the moderator in both of the meetings. They basically had 2 hours in each of the meetings, and in the first meeting we did a brainstorming approach. So they were given, I again told them these are the resources, this is kind of a story, and then showed them a map, a pretty high-level map of the fictional stadium we were looking at, and then we basically started in a brainstorming session. So without criticizing each other, really looking at also some crazy ideas on what the courses of action could be. Yeah? Both of them did this, and we in the end of this first brainstorming session, we came up with a rudimentary plan. So we also thought about reconnaissance. So what would both teams kind of do in order to find out the other team's plans? And then in running up to the next session, basically, or we as the white team, we took a decision on what kind of additional information they would get for the next phase or for the next meeting. Some kind of the reconnaissance they would do. So, for example, the red team, they said, yeah, we're gonna let fly a drone with a "Marry Me" banner. So it's kind of a cover for action a week before the game. As a reconnaissance effort. And then we told them, yeah, basically you're going to see a netting over the stadium roof, because this is what the blue team said in the preliminary course of action. And you're also going to see a radar installation. So they had a little bit more detailed on what would be planning for. Yeah. So we tried to make this as realistically as possible, ideally. And then in the next meeting, we basically went through a more structured approach in order to flesh out the preliminary plans we developed at the first meeting. So a little bit orienting on classical military decision-making process. We went through that more or less in order to see that we have really some answers to also the different phases of an operation. So how do you do reconnaissance? How do you, for the red team, how do you bring your assets there? How you procure the drones? How do you cover this? And how do you then conduct the attack? Yeah. And this we did for the red and for the blue. And basically afterwards we started writing everything down and we did our internal report on that. Yeah.
And what kind of takeaways did you guys find from the first phase? What kind of insights? What can you share about how the red team and blue teams behaved, or how they took on the characters, the process? I imagine for the listeners that would be very interesting to see how well the participants were able to adapt to taking on the characters, working together as the team that they're supposed to be representing, and then what kind of insights we could take away from it, and what we can share in this video about, because I don't obviously want to give away any plans, of how to carry out an attack to anyone who might be watching this, but I'd be interested to hear about that kind of stuff, if you can share.
Yeah, I think something Ingo mentioned is how experienced and how much expertise there was on these teams, and that showed a lot in our results. In particular, the blue team, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ingo, but all of them are professional security providers who have experience defending against drones, or at least some knowledge of that. And so that came forth strongly. And I think, in fact, that the combination of that and also the way that we primed the probability that the attack would be drone dense, we told the red team, we want this to be the main prong of your attack. And we told the blue team, intelligence reports suggest that UAVs will be prominent in the attack. So both sides had that well in mind. And I think the combination of that, we were interested initially in exploring a most likely scenario for for an attack on a stadium, and their knowledge, their deep and varied knowledge of drones, it turned into a black swan attack really fast. They were anticipating multiple swarms in multiple directions with multiple flight modalities, doing multiple activities. So in fact, kind of both sides, but more the blue team was expecting worst case scenario and preparing accordingly. And I suppose that's good, because then they are prepared for the worst, so a simpler attack would be easily intercepted. But yeah, they had a layered defense concept. Should I share that image?
Yeah,
I'm going to share. Okay. So the blue team revolved around this idea. One of the participants, I believe, asserted this as a really strong concept. And so they had a 5-layer defense focused on first with the reconnaissance and intelligence. And then in this outer ring, the outermost ring, they were focused on identifying, detecting, tracking incoming drones. They had the soft kill layer with GPS and jamming, the hard kill layer with the net guns, and then that point defense with the nets that Ingo was talking about in the reconnaissance that we conveyed. So they had a very detailed and developed and personnel and equipment heavy plan based on their expectation of worst case scenario. So I think that was a really interesting takeaway, because I don't think most violent non-state actors have that amount of capacity and creativity and tactical prowess. And so we did learn a lot about some of the incredible flexibility of these platforms, but I think we also have much more to learn about the most likely scenarios that we should be expecting.
And I guess one interesting thing is, as it was all done online over a period of two weeks, right? If I'm not mistaken, what were some of the challenges in facilitating and moderating and actually getting people to come together and do the war game and participate in it and keep the interest up?
Yeah, should I take this, Carrie? So from a moderator side, it was pretty interesting because I mean I was on both teams, which might have led to some cross contamination because you of course a little bit difficult to stay completely uninvolved when questions pop up, and because I also tried to give at the second meeting a little bit of a structure in order to think about all the phases. So this is definitely something that is a lesson learned. We need to avoid that in the next game. So we need to have two different moderators on the white team, and then probably a third person on the white team that then takes decision on what to exchange between the teams. It was also quite interesting. The participation was also a little bit different across the teams. So the blue team was really extremely engaged. All of the persons were there for both of the meetings. Was a bit less with the red team, so there was a really good participation in the first meeting, but then I think in the second meeting there was a little bit also too much for people, which I also got as a feedback in 1 week to have 2 meetings. So this is definitely something that we will need to mitigate in the future. The idea there is then to just spread it out over a longer interval. And we also got some participant feedback. I don't know if that's maybe interesting, or Carrie, you want to talk about this?
To my knowledge, most of them were less interested in playing the exact same game under different teams or information scenarios, but they were really interested in playing different games. So different venues, different adversaries, potentially different attack profiles. And so I do think that there's a lot of potential to vary the games in the future and maintain high interest. And that's important because one of the challenges that both teams, I think, mentioned was not knowing each other in advance made organic brainstorming a little more difficult. And they suggested playing multiple games so that they can sort of develop knowledge of each other and a cooperative rhythm. And so I think that those two things dovetail really nicely. Ingo, I want to piggyback on something that you said, because I think the skimness of the red team, like they're tapering off a little bit, and then the high intense engagement of the blue team, that's humorously similar to the attack profiles. So I think just to go back, Philip, if that's okay, another interesting takeaway is, I think this is our intuition all along, that commercial UAVs give these red teams such an advantage in asymmetry because they're so cheap and so flexible, and defending against them is expensive. I mean, we've seen states sending up a Patriot missile or sending out fighter jets to take down a commercial drone. So clearly a cost discrepancy there. And that came forth very strongly in this game. The red team had a very slim team and a very slender attack profile. So they were able to use few people and magnify their effects with the UAVs. And the blue team, they had their suggestion, they gave us a low risk and a high risk version of what they would suggest for defense. And even the low risk one was mammoth in terms of personnel and equipment and cost. And it required such longer time horizons for planning. I mean, up to 6 months in advance. Whereas the red team was like a couple weeks, canvassing the area and prepping the drones. And the blue team required so much deeper integration across parties and entities. The red team was just a little cell. So it amplified for us that problem. That's one of the reasons why we're mounting this project. And so that came through really strongly. In fact, that's how the teams participated. So that's another thing that I think we can learn more about in the future phases.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting considering the war in Ukraine right now, looking at how there are so many non-state actors there, and then it's basically on both sides like a laboratory of COTS UAVs, development and countermeasures, and then when with this kind of scenario of the phase 1 with the the far right group the presence of far right groups, and then people returning with that knowledge and the transmission of that knowledge. It'd be really interesting to see how this war game, especially if we get a chance to talk about phase two, how it can really develop an understanding of how this can really spread and have limitless threat vectors. And so I guess on that point, we could probably segue in, unless there was any, maybe Carrie, if there's any other limitations or call outs that you would maybe want to talk about on the analytics side or the data side of the phase one. I understand it was kind of a test kickoff round, but if there's anything else that you wanted to point out there.
I think Ingo did pretty well to summarize some of the challenges of especially being the sole moderator. And maybe another thing you could talk about, Ingo, the teams desired much greater moderator engagement than we desired to give. We wanted to see how they functioned, separate from a guide. And I think they sort of clamored for like guidance and context and, detail. And so as an analyst, it made it more difficult to identify what was the independent ideas of the groups versus what Ingo was kind of guiding. I don't know, can you talk some about that, how that went for you, Ingo?
Yeah, I think maybe yeah, you're completely right. So it was of course the expectation was a little bit different that I had as a moderator, what my role would in the end be. I think I mean the brainstorming phase went really well in both of the teams. The ideas forthcoming were really good, but then we had to give and we were also asked to give a little bit of a structure for then really writing a coherent plan based on these ideas. Yeah, so this was something that is not. I mean, maybe doesn't come naturally in a group that is brainstorming that doesn't have then kind of an organizer of these ideas. Yeah, so that organization leads a little bit to leading, I would say, because then you start asking more specific questions because you kind of as a moderator think, okay, there's something lacking here. I know that the red team thought about this and maybe the blue team or the other way around should also think about it. And it's pretty hard not to lead a little bit or to give leading questions, I would say, in that phase. So what maybe ideally we would have maybe somebody from the red team taking over the role, but this of course then needs also some more preparation and kind of in an ad hoc scenario where people don't really know each other, then it's also like difficult to kind of grab this role for once, I think. Yeah.
So maybe iterative gameplay and having team captains?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as a team captain would probably be good in that respect.
Yeah.
I know one of our colleagues who worked on this in the beginning, Nick, actually when he put together the first version, the first draft, I remember that Cart had said this is a really well-made draft. This is almost exactly what we would have come up with ourselves. And he said it's actually because he kind of modeled it off of Dungeons and Dragons, the role-playing game.
Amazing.
And so, but it makes sense. I guess it makes sense that you would have the role of, if we've seen Stranger Things, the Dungeon Master.
The Dungeon Master.
Exactly.
Or if you've played Dungeons and Dragons, Philip, you don't have to watch Stranger Things to know how that works.
I've never played that game before. But yeah, maybe what we just need a couple of Dungeon Masters, more or less. But again, I don't know how that would affect or how we could do it without leading or anything like that, having some kind of influence or biases.
Well, I think that's realistic, though. I mean, we are trying to simulate realism in our games, and it's realistic that a cell would have a leader and that a security team would have a coordinator or a commander. So I think that's a great idea to implement in our live phase 3. There's a good segue for you.
Yeah. So then I guess how we get to phase 3, we have to obviously go to phase 2. And so that would be very interesting, I think, to hear a little bit about phase 2 for everybody. So if you could kind of give us a little bit of a glimpse at what to expect for the next phase.
Phase 2 is, we call it crowdsourced. It is a red teaming only exercise. So you mentioned the Center for Advanced Red Teaming, or CART. They're assisting us in fielding it. And it's a fantastic complement to what we did in phase 1, which was sort of blue team heavy. And it was an isolated venue, an isolated attack profile. So in phase 2, we're seeking to maximize variation and maximize data generation, because indeed why we're trying to stay on the leading edge of this is because data are rare for this. And so we're trying to understand how and why it works. So the second one is a red teaming exercise. And we are seeking as many participants as are interested and as would take it seriously. It's all going to be done online through CART. It should take anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes. So it's low investment compared to this first one. And in it, I don't want to over prime about it, but in it we are assigning, randomly assigning one of 3 attack profiles. So we're also expanding on the ideology, not just the extreme right that was featured in this first phase. And once we prime them with that identity and they do an immersion exercise, then we are setting them loose to tell us what they would do, rather than telling them such strong injects, not telling them where to go or what to do, or giving them any intelligence in advance. We're going to let them, in a less structured and less moderated environment, determine what they would do based on their identity as a red team. And so what we want to understand from that is, again, the most likely courses of action, the most likely targets, because we have, as security providers, we have limited resources, and we can't fully prepare or fully defend every location to the degree that the blue team suggested in phase 1, right? So we have to understand the most vulnerable locations and the most likely attack vectors so that we can be responsible with our security resources and so that we can develop sustainable solutions. So some of the limitations that the phase 2 will overcome. Well, first, all of the blue teams and moderator team was all male. And so the second phase is going to maximize not just gender variation, but all demographic variation. So age, background, experience, education, we're going to have a lot more variation so that our inferences can be more valid, because your average terrorist is not an advanced male security provider, right? So that's going to help us have more valid data. It also, we're going to have more idea about the targets. We're going to have more idea about the courses of action. I think it's going to be more realistic that the video teleconferencing with strangers, you know, that dynamic won't be there since it's all done through this online survey. And we're hoping from that to be able to better inform those most likely and most vulnerable targets. And then in the third phase, Ingo, do you want to talk about that a little bit more? Once we learn all the stuff we're going to learn from phase 2.
Yeah, in the third phase, then it's basically back to application. So we are looking at rerunning kind of the first phase, but then basically with course of action, or the first kind of course of action, or from the team based on the findings out of phase 2. So most likely course of action. So we're not going to have black swans. And we will have the same approach as with phase 1. So again, 2 teams, also a red team. They are kind of limited with their initial course of action, but of course they can flash it out a little bit, and then they will play a 2-round game. So in the second round, they can then respond to whatever the blue team does. We'll be looking at a different sort of target. So because that was what the participant wished for. Either another stadium, specifically a real-world stadium in this case, then maybe to help some of our partners to secure a specific site and or another type of critical infrastructure. So maybe electric grid would be interesting, seeing what's happening at the moment in the world. And yeah, for us, this is then kind of ideally will develop at some point also in a live scenario. So we would like to test then some of these course of actions and systems systems discussed, also in a live test to really see if that would what would fly or what would crash in the literal sense. And we are also looking maybe at developing a simulation where we could then put all this together and make it more graspable, so kind of more touchable for people. And then, of course, we want to rerun the whole show then next year, and basically then update the whole process and look at additional critical infrastructure sites. Yeah.
Great. Well, I guess the only last question I have is if you can share anything about any of the upcoming dates, if there's anything that we can talk about the next when people can expect to start seeing the next steps. Do we have a theoretical timeline?
We don't have a concrete one yet. Here's what I'll say. Phase 2 is coming soon. We have full approval. It's fully designed. So anyone who's still watching, I designed it in league with CART, and I'm very keen to see the results. So please consider participating in phase 2. I think it's going to be a great game and great data and insight that we can draw from it. So consider contributing to national and international security by donating 30 minutes of your time. So it's designed, it's programmed, it's approved, and we are just kind of finding the exact right window of time to field it with CART, since it's going to be on their platform. But we anticipate that it's going to be very soon, maybe in a matter of a week or two, as soon as we can just like pinpoint those dates. But I'm sure you'll make an announcement once we have it formalized.
All right, then. So we have a very exciting opportunity to see crowdsourced intelligence, which I believe recently the CIA was talking about as a new form, a new discipline of intelligence, a way of overcoming cognitive biases, heuristics, and limitations.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And that's from Hewer himself, Richard Hewer. So I think we have a lot of opportunities here for an issue that is definitely going to be, it's not an if, it's a when kind of threat for the future. So on that note, I want to just say thank you again to Dr. Carrie Chavez from Texas Tech University and Ingo. I'm gonna butcher.
Almost.
And Chief Executive Officer Ingo.
Yeah, exactly. That's the correct way to say it.
CEO.
Will I have a job after this? Anyway.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you for joining, and
Thank you.
Keep watching, and we'll have another couple exciting episodes coming up in the weeks to come. Okay, take care, everyone.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Philip.
Bye.